Hey everybody, this is John. Welcome back to another video. The indicator that I'll be covering in this tutorial is based on the work of Mike Webster. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Mike. He worked alongside William O'Neill for many years, and he was a portfolio manager at O'Neill Capital Management. On a recent Investing with IBD podcast, Mike shared details on how he uses the relative strength line along with two moving averages to hold positions for bigger moves. Mike refers to his approach as the Quicksand and Grateful Dead RS. If you're not familiar with the Grateful Dead, it's a band that started here in the United States back in the mid-1960s. The IBD podcast does a deep dive into all the nuances of working with QQGD, and I'll include a link to the video in the description below. So let's do a quick overview of how this works, and then we'll go into more detail in the settings and look at several additional charts. So this is the RS line, this blue line here. This is the faster moving average. This is a weekly chart, so it defaults to an 8 SMA. This is the slower moving average, and that defaults to the 21 SMA. The basic concept is as the relative strength line breaks through the faster moving average, that's what Mike refers to as the quick, you would take partial profit. Once you're below that faster moving average, this is the quicksand area. So you have to be careful in here. Depending on the price action, you may continue to sell, or in this example, you can see the relative strength line goes back up through that moving average. The dead is a reference to William O'Neill's book, How to Make Money in Stocks, where Bill mentions in the battlefield that is the stock market, there's the quick and the dead. And that's where Mike came up with a reference to the Grateful Dead. So the point is, as the relative strength line breaks through this slower moving average, that's where you close out your position. Let's dig into a little more detail, and we'll start with looking at the settings and the options that you can configure. So let's head over to a new chart. This is Celsius Holdings. We're still on the weekly time frame. If I bring up settings, I'm going to scroll down to the section that begins with the RS line. Up here on top is all the data that is for the RS line itself, and down below we have the moving average information. There's two moving averages for the daily time frame and two for the weekly, and by default I set the color for the faster moving average and the slower moving average to be the same between these two time frames. And the idea was, as you swap between a daily and a weekly chart, you could very quickly recognize which one is the faster moving average and which one is the slower. Obviously you can configure these however you prefer. Looking at the RS line information, we can specify the index we want to compare to. The offset refers to the vertical offset up and down in the chart. At times it can be helpful to increase or decrease this value depending on the symbol and the time frame that you're looking at. The look back refers to how many bars back from the most recent bar are we looking to see if we've reached a new high. I'll come back to this one in just a minute. We also have an option to show symbols on the chart that represent the RS line being at a new high or a new high before price. So by default, I show those symbols on the RS line, and that's what these represent here. The little circles represent the RS line at new high. This little square here represents the RS line at a new high before the price reaches a new high. We can move those symbols to the top of the chart if we prefer, or the bottom of the chart, and we can turn them off altogether if we don't want them. So that kind of begs the question, when would I prefer to have the symbol shown on the top or the bottom? And the reason I elected to include this option is there can be times it's nice to turn the RS line off and only have the information as it relates to the new highs and the new high before price. So if I go ahead and close settings here, we can still see at a glance that the relative strength was hitting new highs at this point, and there were several instances where it was at a new high before price, even though we don't have the RS line shown on the chart. I'm going to go ahead and turn those back on, show the line, and show the symbols on the chart. And now you can see when you hover over these, if you forget what they represent, the little circle is the RS line at a new high, and the green square is the RS line at a new high before price. Now that we have the relative strength line and the moving averages configured, what we're looking for are breaks of either the faster moving average or the slower moving average. I have an additional tool that I've added that it helps you to visualize that a little bit easier. If you go into the section for the RS line and you choose this last bar moving average breaks. When there's a break of the RS line through the faster moving average, I turn the last section of the RS line to yellow. I'm going to swap over to a chart of AMD, and you can see here on this last segment of the RS line, it broke through the slower moving average, so that bar is now red. In addition to these little helpful signals, having more context can also be very helpful. So one more time, go back into settings and scroll down to the same section, and this time enable this option that says historical moving average breaks. And now you can see the history of all the times that the relative strength line broke through the faster moving average as well as the slower moving average. For instance, we can see right here, this was a break of the faster moving average, so it's yellow. This is that quicksand area that Mike referred to. There was another section right here where the RS line continued to stay below the faster moving average, and then ultimately it broke through the slower moving average, so it turned red. Now, if you take a step back and you look at this chart of AMD, you can see that the relative strength line has been very inconsistent. So it's above the moving average and then it's below, it goes back and forth. It's quite choppy. If we bring up another chart, this is Elf Beauty. You can see here that the relative strength line was very consistently above the quicker moving average. At this point, it broke through and then it went sideways in the quicksand area for a bit. You may have sold part of your position, and then you just continue to hold it. Again, it got very choppy, and ultimately we got the signal here where it went through both the faster moving average as well as the slower moving average, and this might be the location where you finally actually close out that position. The concepts that I've been sharing here can be carried over onto a daily time frame and more of a swing trading approach. Now, with that said, whether you're looking at a daily chart or a weekly chart, breaks of the moving averages in either direction aren't direct buy and sell points. Rather, they're a helpful tool in your analysis to get an idea of the trend and consider potential trade setups, whether that be entries, exits, or adding onto a position. So let's look at NVIDIA back here in November. We can see that moving average alignment began back here. That's what this gray box is, when the low was above these two moving averages. The relative strength line also showed a positive momentum as it went up through both of its moving averages. Now, once we got up to this area and the price started to consolidate, we can see here the relative strength line moved into that quicksand area that Mike Webster referred to. So this may be a place where you start to take off part of your position, and then as it goes down through, you may actually consider closing out that position. You can see the relative strength is relatively choppy in here. There's no real consistent, obvious trend. And it's kind of the same here, where it's going up and then it just slowly moves back and forth. And eventually what happens is the relative strength moves up through both of its moving averages, and it consistently continues to move up. And that goes along with this point right here, where the price breaks above this consolidation area. As we pull back up here on the chart, we can see we have the relative strength touching that faster moving average. And then we have the quicksand area once again over here on the right side. So again, the idea here is to use these tools in your analysis, figure out what works best for your style of trading, as well as your risk management process. I hope you found this video helpful. I appreciate your support of my work, and we'll see you in the next video.